يريد أن يعاقبكم لأنكم صمتم. يريد أن يعاقبكم لأنكم انتصرتم.
אני פני, אני אם ל4 ילדים, ואני אומר כדי שהילדים שלי יחיו במדינה הזאת, אנחנו חייבים להשיב מלחמה שערה.
Israeli officials have yet to publicly acknowledge responsibility for the reported overnight explosions in parts of Iran on Friday. Tehran has dismissed these as attacks by tiny drones that were shot down by its air defense systems. Iran may be downplaying what was likely to have been a significant but limited Israeli attack, but that seems to be secondary to the larger forces at play. What is plain to see is that both Iran and Israel are keen to wrap up the most dangerous escalation between the two regional powerhouses to date. This month's dramatic escalation, which began with an apparent Israeli airstrike on Iran's consulate in Damascus, was followed by a largely foiled Iranian attack of over 300 airborne weapons on Israel. However, it seems that this has now been rapidly resolved. A regional intelligence source told the newspaper shortly after the Friday morning attack in Iran that Iran was not expected to respond further and that the direct state-to-state strikes between the two enemy states were over. The latest flare-up brought the stakes into sharp focus, but it also exposed the limits of a direct confrontation between Iran and Israel. Israel's attack on Iran's consulate in Syria on 1st April, which killed a senior Iranian commander and key intermediary between Tehran and Lebanon's Hezbollah, risked provoking a response from the powerful Shia militant group on its northern border. As part of Iran's retaliatory attack on Israel, its weapons navigated over at least 2 neighboring countries that house U.S. bases. What happens between Iran and Israel rarely stays between Iran and Israel. The region is deeply intertwined, which heightens the risks of military action, but also acts as guardrails against a potential conflagration. When U.S. officials said last weekend that Washington would not participate in an Israeli response to Iran's attack on Israel, that immediately took the wind out of the sails of a potential escalation. U.S. forces had shot down more than 70 of Iran's weapons as they headed to Israel. By buttressing Israel's defenses, the U.S. had done its part in protecting its stalwart allies. But participating in Friday's attack would have been a step too far for the U.S., thrusting a region dotted with U.S. allied states into the unknown. Regional considerations may also be cause for restraint. Iran's fledgling friendships with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, both major U.S. allies, are a centerpiece of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi's foreign policy. Diplomatic relations between Tehran and Riyadh, former arch-nemeses, were restored during talks brokered last year by China, which threw its weight into maintaining those normalization agreements. It is clear that any region-wide turmoil would risk compromising those key relationships. Those dangers may be lost in Iran and Israel's more hawkish quarters, where the more extremist elements may be itching for a final showdown. Israel's far-right National Security Minister Eidar Banir blasted Friday's attack as weak. Over the past week, Israeli media reported that he had urged Israel's war cabinet to go crazy, apparently bristling at indications of a tempered military response from Israel. In Iran, analysts speculated that the shooting down of Iranian weapons in and around Israel's airspace was likely to have underscored an imbalance of power in favor of its enemy, ultimately empowering the hardliners in Tehran to flout international pressure and advance the country's long-feared nuclear program. This month's flare-up will undoubtedly stir up domestic tensions as the two sworn enemies return to their long-running shadow war. Iran's non-state allies will continue to fight Israel and the U.S. in various parts of the Middle East. They have vowed to keep up the fight as long as Israel's devastating war in Gaza continues. Those battles, which span Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, grow in complexity the longer they go on. The Israeli War Cabinet is scheduled to meet later Sunday to discuss efforts to free the remaining hostages held in Gaza, according to an Israeli official. The War Cabinet is made up of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, and Benny Gantz, who is chairman of the National Unity Party. In a video statement released by the government press office to mark Passover on Sunday, Netanyahu said, "This night, 133 of our dear brothers and sisters do not sit at the Seder table and are still imprisoned in the hell of Hamas. Netanyahu accused Hamas of rejecting proposals for a hostage deal outright and said Israel will soon land. Meanwhile, parties to these conflicts will continue to test the limits of the unwritten rules of engagement, hoping to assert their power and brandish their arsenal while preventing a complete downward spiral into war. There is much to read between the lines of the latest flare-up, but it is clear that both sides of the regional battle have decided that they have too much to lose in all-out war.
At TechStrikeX, subscribe.